SEC Network. That's a couple of really cool behind-the-scenes moments from that game. But that was a really fun one. Jay Shipe says, don't let them Aggies web boards upset you. Jay, always talking about those Aggies on here, man. Thomas T-Bone 86, talking about those Braves from last night. Yeah, pounding Philadelphia, which is never a bad thing. And Alex Anthopoulos, Braves general manager, also active here. The trade deadline, bringing in a closer from the Angels. So the Braves, is this history repeating itself? We're going to talk about that for Georgia here in a moment. But the Braves being active at a trade deadline, is that an example of that? Brad Hotnet also mentioning RIP to the GOAT, Vin Scully. And this was tremendous. By the way, good morning to you all on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. We get going live here, DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management across all of our video platforms. We'll begin our show here in just a moment, but glad to have you on video. One of our commenters just mentioned the passing of Vin Scully. And, you know, Scully was just terrific. And everything about him is kind of amazing. The longevity, the fact that Vin Scully, you know, only recently stopped doing some Dodgers games at least. And when I was a kid, he was also kind of the national voice of the NBC games, and obviously famously doing like the 86 World Series, the 88 World Series. His calls for those games, very memorable, very, just sort of stand out prominently in time. But in addition to like calling games as recently as a few years ago, he was doing Jackie Robinson's games. I mean, this was a guy that was like the Dodger play-by-play voice dating back to their time in Brooklyn. The longevity is what's amazing, and his style in calling the games is obviously just, I mean, it's awe-inspiring. I mean, he was so good. And you think about like even like fictional things. Like, have you seen the movie For the Love of the Game? It's not everybody's cup of tea. Some people think it's a little too rom-com-y, but I love the movie. It's the one where Kevin Costner plays the pitcher, and he's trying to pitch a perfect game. And there's a little bit of like a sort of retrospective look back on his life and some of the events in his life as he's pitching the attempting the perfect game. I think it's a great movie. And Vin Scully's like the best part of the movie. He is so good. And when you think about a guy like Scully, it's hard not to think a little bit about our own guy like that, Larry Munson, for kind of the same reason. Like when I was a kid, Vin Scully doing like, say, a World Series game, because we weren't watching a lot of local Dodgers games. I knew him as the guy on NBC. Saturdays, he and Joe Garagiola were doing that sort of game of the week on NBC and doing a lot of World Series, things like that. You know, back then, you're just watching baseball. But at some point in time, late in his life and a little later on in my life, all of a sudden it becomes, hey, you better enjoy Vin Scully while you can, because obviously this is the kind of thing that's special and won't last forever. And it's Munson the same way. You know, when I was a kid, not to be, 100 years old here, or, old man on the porch, but not every Georgia game was on TV. Some of that was because you just didn't televise all the games back then, and some of that's because the SEC teams were always on probation, and they were barred from being on television. That's just fact of the matter, kind of the way that it was. And so, I mean, I really listened to a lot of Larry Munson games on the radio growing up. And when you're a kid, that's just how you consume Georgia football. You're listening to Georgia football. But as I got a little older and you start to appreciate the fact that things don't last forever, it became this opportunity of, well, you better listen to Larry Munson while you can. You better enjoy this while you can, because one day this is not going to exist anymore, and you better make sure you take time to appreciate that. I'm thankful that I did. But it's hard, when you see a beloved broadcaster like Vin Scully, hard not to kind of think about your own guys like that, both, obviously for Larry Munson, one of my true heroes when it comes to like broadcasting, things like that. But also we were really lucky growing up. We had P. Van Wieren and Skip Carey, and Ernie Johnson Sr. was a great broadcaster. And, we were so lucky as Braves fans at that time. Back then they used to rotate TV, radio. We were so lucky to have guys like that told such a good story as they broadcast those games. So Vin Scully means a lot to a lot of people, especially out in the L.A. area where he lived for such a long time. But even for those of us who weren't Dodgers fans or living out west, we connected with him nationally. He was always very good. Diedrich Frazier says all the greats sound unique. They do. I don't know that anyone's ever sounded better than Scully. He had a little bit of almost like a sing-song quality to his voice that, it can't be emulated because it was just too pristine and perfect to be emulated. It was just so rich and perfect. I just really enjoyed it. All right. Scott Harris says listening to the radio-only games were awesome memories when I was in college. Yeah, I did enjoy it. Like, obviously it's better to be able to see things, I guess, but that was the cool thing about Munson is he made you feel like you were seeing, and you just felt so connected to it. This is like, as old school as it gets. Like I used to sit at home and look at the radio. Like that's as old school as you could ever possibly be. But that's what we did sometimes back then for sure. Dog Daddy checking in to say happy birthday, Dog Nation and Daily. Dog Daddy, appreciate that for you. And it has gotten late on us. We got to get going here. All right, so Mike Griffith coming up. We'll do a practice report with him, getting ready for the start of practice here this week. I am actually angry today. Don't let my good mood fool you. I'm actually angry today, and I don't get angry frequently, but I am angry today. I believe I have unearthed some absolutely verifiable bias against Georgia. And I'm going to put it on display for the entire world to see here in a moment. We have the receipts, and we're going to put that on display. Also, a very interesting statement being made about Jalen Carter, which I believe leads us to a pretty fun conversation about the role he could play for Georgia here this season. We'll do some of that. Some of you had wanted to see the picture that I shared yesterday. We'll show some of that to you on the screen here before we're done. It's going to be a fun show. We are really happy to have you for it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Breda Pest Management, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Breda Pest Management, the official pest control of UGA Athletics.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I have to admit today I'm a little bit fired up. I don't get angry much, but I'm a little bit angry today. And I think this probably happens around this time each and every year, where you've just sort of waited as long for college football as you can wait, and at a certain point you're just sort of at fever pitch, ready to be sort of shot out of a cannon, ready to see your team play and kind of get into the mix and do what we do, which is argue about college football with some actual games to kind of argue about. I think we're kind of the boiling point of the preseason. It's a good thing the practice is beginning here this week. It's a good thing that the first game against Oregon's kind of right there around the corner. All of that is really good because I'm not quite so sure how much longer I can wait before we finally get some actual red meat to consume here, which is watching Georgia going out there and trying to do what it did a year ago, which is win the national championship. And with that in mind, let me kind of explain why I'm fired up today. So CBS put out its power rating, or whatever you call it, ranking, I guess. It's not a preseason poll. This is like a rank or like a rating of all, and there are now 131 teams in FBS. Congratulations to the James Madison Dukes, who are moving into the FBS category. I believe they're playing in the Sun Belt this year. But the Dukes of James Madison become the 131st team in the FBS category. And CBS has got them rated all on their website there at cbssports.com. Now, here's the thing that makes me a little bit angry. I don't have to tell you where Georgia's ranked. Most of you already know, and you haven't seen the story. You don't know what it is, or haven't seen the ratings, but you kind of already know where Georgia is, because Georgia is that's the same spot in this rating as they are everywhere else. They are third. They are behind Alabama, and they are behind Ohio State. Now, let me say this with the Alabama Crimson Tide here for a moment. If you want to say, as a neutral observer or just a person that has an opinion about college football, if you want to say that Alabama's better than Georgia, it's your right to do that. Honestly, opinions related to Alabama and Georgia don't mean all that much to me, because eventually, if things go according to plan, these two teams will play at least once. So maybe I think Georgia's better than Alabama. Maybe you think Alabama's better than Georgia. But one way or another, there will be a scoreboard result on a field somewhere, we think eventually, that settles all of that. The opinions related to the Dogs and the Crimson Tide are relatively meaningless, because we believe eventually this will be settled on the field. In the case of Ohio State, though, that's less true. Ohio State has kind of existed in the orbit of college football playoff contenders, but last year they were kind of nowhere to be found when the postseason began. So the comparison between Georgia and Ohio State is a little more figurative, I guess. It's a little more subjective. It's one of those things where the opinions on this probably matter a little bit more, because really opinion is kind of all we have. We haven't seen Georgia and Ohio State play head-to-head since 1992. This is simply a beauty contest of who favors one over the other. And the fact that, understanding all of that it seems to be unanimous that Ohio State is better than Georgia, I find to be ludicrous. And that doesn't mean that Ohio State won't, win the national championship this year. They clearly could. But the notion that virtually everyone with kind of the blue check next to their name, or sort of everyone who gets to kind of do these rating services or rankings, whatever else, for a living, they're all just sure that Ohio State is better than Georgia, the fact that the opinion is so unified and so unanimous, I find to be a little bit weird. And I've kind of touched on this a little bit before, that you almost get the perception here that this could be a little bit of a bias against Georgia. And so this morning, what I tried to do, when sometimes I get fired up, I kind of go down rabbit holes. This morning, what I tried to do to begin our show is try to find some evidence for why it is that so many people, virtually everyone who kind of does this stuff at the national level, is just sure that Ohio State is better than Georgia. Let me tell you what I found. I believe I have found verifiable proof of bias against UGA. And I say this somewhat, tongue-in-cheek, but nonetheless, verifiable proof of bias against UGA. Now, it's not intentional bias because the people that are speaking in some respects aren't necessarily even the same people. But it does sort of, I think, point to this common belief that sort of seems to be floating in the atmosphere of college football that just sort of seems to give credit to the Buckeyes, ranked ahead of Georgia, that does not seem to go in terms of giving credit to UGA. Now, after I kind of lay all this out, I'm going to explain to you why I believe that matters. But let me use this as evidence. Now, one of the things that we talk about a lot on this show, although this offseason, for whatever reason, we just didn't do it, I guess we were just too busy, is the magazine Athlon Sports? It's like the preseason magazine. I like old school preseason magazines, kind of always will. And one of my favorite aspects of any of the preseason magazines, and Athlon does this really well, it's the anonymous coach quotes. Let's go get anonymous coaches who will be more candid if they don't have to give their name, and let's ask them about the teams around the country, and they'll say interesting stuff because they can do so under the cloak of anonymity. And when you look at these anonymous coaches talking about Georgia and Ohio State, I think it's very revealing. I think it is revealing of the larger belief system that seems to be existing out there in college football. And as I said before, I think it seems to be a little bit of a bias against UGA. So again, let me give you 3 quick examples here, and then I'm going to try to explain to you why all of this matters and what all of this means of Ohio State seemingly getting the benefit of the doubt in a way that Georgia doesn't. Now, first of all, here's what you know, is that Ohio State and Georgia are almost opposite teams, right? Like Ohio State, great offense last year, pretty lousy defense. The perception of Georgia was great defense, but just enough offense, even though somewhat statistically speaking, that wasn't true. But that's kind of the caricature that gets drawn of both these teams. Got to understand that going into this. So here's an anonymous coach from the Big Ten, quoted by Athlon about Ohio State, saying, last year, this was one of the best college offenses possible. And even losing NFL receivers, they're still deep at that position. It's insane. Now, this may be true. It probably is. Ohio State seems to reload defensively each and every year. But listen to the way in which Georgia, not the same coaches, but the same publication, listen to the way that Georgia coming into this season isn't given the same, I guess, benefit of the doubt on the side of the ball in which they were strongest a year ago. So we're told by the anonymous coach from the Big Ten that no matter how much they lose offensively, they're going to still be deep because they're so insanely talented. But on Georgia's defensive side of the ball, the anonymous coach that's quoted here says, losing Dan Lanning as defensive coordinator isn't going to really hurt. But losing all those NFL players up front sure as hell will. Hold on. How are we so sure before a season begins that Ohio State's going to easily replace what it lost on offense? And they lost, a good bit from the wide receiver spot. But Georgia's somehow going to have trouble replacing what it lost on defense. Now, maybe that ends up being true. We haven't seen all the games play yet. But why would Ohio State naturally get the benefit of the doubt on one side, whereas Georgia kind of doesn't naturally get that same benefit of the doubt on the other? Has Georgia recruited defensive players at a lower clip than Ohio State's recruited offensive players? I'd suggest not. I would suggest if there's benefit of the doubt to be given, it probably belongs equally on both sides. Will Ohio State have great receiver play this year? Yes, because they almost always do. But as objective as I'm capable of being, will Georgia have great defensive play this year? I'm going to give you the same answer. Yes, Georgia will have great defensive play this year because much like the Buckeyes when it comes to wide receivers, they almost always do. But that's not the biggest example of bias as unearthed here by Athlon Sports as kind of a picture of the way in which these two teams are talked about on a fairly regular basis. Once again, anonymous coach being quoted about Georgia here. Let's look at the offensive side of the ball for a moment. And these aren't the same coaches saying this about the Buckeyes and the Dogs, but they do represent sort of the common line of thinking that seems to exist out there. Anonymous coach quoted about Georgia. The quarterback is back. Doesn't even mention his name. The quarterback is back, but one of the worst things that can happen after a successful season or a title run is when a good but not great quarterback comes back. Everyone is expecting an advancement that might not be possible, this coach says. Remember, there were times last season they won in spite of the offense. I'd actually like to go back and see the game in which Stetson Bennett played, in which Georgia won in spite of the offense, but nonetheless. So when it comes to Stetson Bennett, the Georgia fans hoping for offensive improvement, well, it just might not be possible. Forget the fact that Georgia was like 5th in the country in offensive efficiency last year, 8th in points scored. This improvement you're hoping to see, it might just not be possible. Now compare this to where they talk about the Ohio State defense, which barely made the top 40 a year ago. A defense that was barely inside the top 40 by almost any metric you want to look at. So here's what the anonymous coach quoted by Athlon Sports says about the Ohio State defense, as deficient as it was. The sole issue that kept them out of the playoffs last year has been fixed. Before the season even begins, it's already fixed? Are you just so sure of that? He says it's all about how fast the new defensive coordinator, Jim Knowles, who is a respected coach, we don't deny that, coming over from Oklahoma State. It's just simply all about how fast he gets them fit for what he wants. I mean, imagine this degree of benefit of the doubt being extended towards Ohio State. Their defense last year was just downright bad. Georgia, by comparison, the only crime the offense committed was just not being as good as its defense was. But Georgia was still 8th in points scored and within the top 5 in every efficiency metric across the board. But somehow anonymous coach talking about the Georgia offense says, there's only so much improvement you can expect. Whereas the Ohio State defense, which was just downright lousy, embarrassingly so, frankly, downright lousy, and yet, once again, anonymous coach quoted about the Buckeyes says, hey, the sole issue that kept them out of the playoff a year ago, it's already fixed. Don't need to play the games. It's already fixed. We're sure about this. We're so sure that we're going to rank them ahead of Georgia in every single poll that comes out. That's beyond insane. I was going to read you another quote here, but I feel like I've made the point here. That somehow, some way, there is this benefit of the doubt for whatever reason extended to a team like Ohio State that does not seem to be extended to a team like Georgia, and I believe these anonymous coaching quotes are evidence of that. But here's where the news gets good for Georgia fans. Last year was kind of the same thing. Going into last season, there were also very few people who thought Georgia was going to really do anything. If you remember, Georgia was 5th in the preseason coaches poll. Now, they didn't have a great year in 2020, so that's maybe part of the reason why. But there weren't very many people really at all predicting Georgia to do anything a year ago. In fact, so much so that the one guy who did kind of put himself out there, Peter Burns from the SEC Network, when he actually picked Georgia to win the national championship, that stood as so much of an outlier to us. Wow, there's one guy who actually thinks Georgia may be pretty good this year. We actually brought him on the show to help him make the case for Georgia, considering the fact that nobody else was doing so. So, the idea that to begin the 2022 season, everybody's so sure that Ohio State's better than Georgia, hey, maybe this is just an example that history is going to repeat itself, and all of a sudden, no one paying any attention to UGA whatsoever kind of actually works out to be a pretty good thing. In fact, let me give you a reminder of what Peter Burns said to us when we told him, hey, Peter, I'm not sure you're noticing this, but you're really the only guy that seems to believe in Kirby, an only guy that seems to believe in UGA for this year. This is what Burns said about that last year.
I am shocked. How in the hell am I the only person that sees what's developing in Athens over the last couple of years and not think that this team is the best team in the country? Like, this was shocking to me, when you reached out and I heard that. I mean, I don't know if people are so just, laser focused on 1980, but who the hell cares about if it's been 1 year, 6 years or 60 years? Like, the team is the team, and I'm shocked. And hell, I was shocked they came in at 5th in the USA Today Coaches Poll.
Yeah, I'm with Peter Burns on this. I don't quite know why it was true a year ago or why it's true right now. But I will say this. You better overlook Georgia at your own peril. Be careful doing this. Be careful assuming that Georgia's just going to kind of settle into some sort of level below the Ohio States, the Alabamas, this big showdown that everybody seems to want to see right now. Be careful assuming that Georgia's going to cooperate with that narrative. Be careful assuming that Georgia's going to be content and complacent after having won the national championship. Don't assume that Georgia's not going to start getting pretty greedy. And all of a sudden, the taste of a parade late January, moving into early February, that being the kind of thing that Georgia only wants to do once. The impression I get, and you want to go back to SEC Media Days, I think you got pretty good evidence of that, is that Georgia actually kind of likes being national champion. And I don't know that Georgia's looking to relinquish its title in that regard anytime soon, nor do I think it's going to slow down at all in terms of its pursuit of its next national championship. And Kirby Smart basically said as much a couple of weeks ago. This was Kirby as a reminder.
I've done the rounds this morning. I'll bet you at least 50 people have asked me the question. So feel free when we open up for questions to ask me the concern there is for complacency. That does not concern me in the least, because to be complacent, you have to have done something and achieved something. The men on this team for this season have not done that. They have not. We have 15 players that are now gone to NFL camps or draft picks. They're gone. And we have some returning players, but they're hungry as ever. People have asked the question, how does it feel to be hunted? We will not be hunted at the University of Georgia. I can promise you that. The hunting that we do will be done from us going the other direction. It's not something we're going to sit back and be passive about.
Let me ask an honest question. Does the coach who said that hide under the bed at the thought of playing Ohio State? My guess is he probably doesn't, nor the thought of playing Alabama either. And I realize that there are things way more important in life than the media and coaches overrating the Buckeyes. I realize that's, not that serious of an issue, but this is why I am so ready for these games to be played. Because last year, Georgia just went out there week after week after week and showed the world how wrong they were about UGA and put a fact pattern on the table that could not be denied, even though in the aftermath it seems like people still sort of overlook it from time to time. And I really do think as we get close to the start of the season with practice beginning tomorrow, I think they could do it all over again. I think that if you're underrating UGA, if you're overlooking UGA, you may be about to make just as big a mistake by doing that this year as you would have done last year. And the games that are about to be played may be all the evidence we need of just how true that really is. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Breda Pest Management, and glad to have you with us today, no matter how you get to us. Whether it be live on video, we get going 9:45, 1st and 15, DawgNation.com, and on the DawgNation app. We're 10 a.m. after that. Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. A lot of video ways to watch the show. A lot of podcast ways to listen to the show. The Apple Player, the Spotify, the Google Player. So many ways to connect with our program, including on the radio each and every day on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. So no matter how you get to us, we are happy to have you with us as a part of the show. And man, I love our sponsors. I am so thankful for good companies that do great work. And that's what Breda Pest Management is for you there as well. First of all, it's kind of a cool company to be connected to because they're the official pest control provider of UGA Athletics. That means they're protecting Sanford Stadium from termites and critters and all that kind of stuff. They do the same thing for all the athletic venues there at UGA, and they can provide that same level of service for you. But here's what's also, I think, really fun, and this is why when I come on here and make these recommendations and tell you about these companies, one of the reasons why I'm so enthusiastic about doing that is because I know that my friends at Breda Pest Management can do something for you that you really need right now. They have a huge army of folks working for them. They have unparalleled sort of expertise in this space, dating back to the 1970s, 100-something people working for them. And all of that can be leveraged to actually provide you the kind of service you need at a lower price than maybe you're paying right now. So you got a termite company, you got a pest control company, and your rate's going up. You're getting that letter, that dreaded letter, oh, things are more expensive, blah, blah, blah. That's why you want to make the switch to Breda Pest Management, because they're going to put more money in your pocket right away just for making that decision. It's almost like your own NIL deal, right? When you switch over to Breda Pest Management, you get more money instantly just for doing that. So please find them online. It's BredaPest.com, BREDA, BredaPest.com, and they'll get you saving money and get you well taken care of. Make sure you trust them today. Our buddy Matt Breda, we talked about being excited about the college football season. I know Matt is. I see him at these games all the time. He's a fun fixture at tailgates and a big dog fan, big local sports fan on the way around. You see him a lot of Braves games, things like that. So good dude for sure, and he employs good people, and they do good work at a great price for you. So check out BredaPest.com for more on that. Speaking of good dudes, we'll talk to our buddy Mike Griffith here coming up in just a moment. We'll do a Georgia Farm Bureau practice report with him, and it's boy, those two words right there. I mean, how good is that? Practice report. We're very, very close to having some of that going on. We'll preview a lot of that with our buddy Mike Griffith here today. Before that, though, kind of a simple and quick around the doghouse to get us there. I realize that Pro Football Focus is not everybody's cup of tea, and even for me, I've told you before, I'm just not quite as into some of the analytic stuff as I used to be. Some of this stuff is sort of overly, needlessly complicated. And, Kirby Smart's even cast some sort of skeptical eyes in the direction of Pro Football Focus before. But when they say something we like, we sort of cite it. When they say something that we don't, we criticize it. But one of their guys has given a huge level of praise to Jalen Carter. Now, this matters to me, not just because Georgia fans like hearing good things about good players, but also because of specifically what this might mean. Let me show you. This is Mike Renner, one of their dudes on Twitter, saying that Jalen Carter could challenge Quinnen Williams, former Alabama defensive lineman, for the best defensive tackle prospect in Pro Football Focus history. Now, that's a huge level of praise, and obviously you hope that Jalen Carter has that kind of season for UGA. But I want to specifically for a moment talk about Quinnen Williams, about why this matters. And one of the points I made going into last year for a guy like Jordan Davis who was kind of a defensive tackle earning a lot of praise for Georgia at the time, was that in the SEC, the league probably most known for great defensive line play, the best defensive linemen do have stats next to their name. And that if Jordan Davis was going to take the next step of his career, coming up with a bigger stat line might be appropriate for him. And the truth is Davis actually achieved his greatness in a slightly different way than I sort of thought that he would. But the overall point still stands, is that when you think about the best defensive lineman in recent years in the SEC, you think about guys like Derek Brown, who put up big numbers. You think about Javon Kinlaw at South Carolina, who put up big numbers. And you think about Quinnen Williams. If the guy from Pro Football Focus is saying, hey, we think of Jalen Carter as a Quinnen Williams level prospect, that could mean something huge for Georgia statistically. Because you can look back at Williams last season in Alabama. He had 8 sacks. He had 19.5 tackles for loss. Y'all, that's the story of the Georgia defense a year ago. It wasn't just good because it didn't give up many points. There are plenty of Georgia defense under Kirby Smart that didn't give up very many points and didn't allow very many yards. This defense last year, the thing that made it exceptional was how dynamic that it was, how impactful that it was. More tackles for loss, more sacks than we'd seen from previous Kirby Smart defenses. This became a defense that had sort of an offensive mindset. They were going out there looking to make something happen, not just prevent something from happening. They were looking to make something happen. And a lot of the guys who contribute to that, sure enough, truly are gone, and you do have to replace them. But when you think about Carter maybe fitting into the kind of stats that a guy like Derek Brown put up at Auburn, or what Kinlaw did, or as the PFF guy says, what Quinnen Williams once did at Alabama, all of a sudden getting back to a similar statistical profile for Georgia here in 2022, if Carter were to travel that kind of path, well, all of a sudden it becomes a lot easier to be able to do that. So simple point about what's probably Georgia's best player on paper, maybe the stat line to show that before the year is done, kind of fun to consider all of that. Here's what else is fun to consider. The fact that the Dogs are getting going on the practice field. We are ready for it all. Our buddy Mike Griffith is there as well. He'll be there for the press conference stuff tomorrow. Gets a chance to do some eyewitness observations of practice, which is always a really fun thing. And we'll ask him right now what he is going to be looking for as we get ready to do a Georgia Farm Bureau practice report with Mike Griffith here on DawgNation Daily today.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
So fun to be doing this again, our Georgia Farm Bureau practice report, insider update with Mike Griffith here right now, diving into what happens tomorrow when Georgia officially begins its preparations for the upcoming season. And Mike, I'm curious what you want to see from practice. We'll get to that in a moment, what you'll be looking for. But you'll also get a chance to ask Kirby Smart some questions, and you did some of that already at SEC Media Days. But just for the sake of this conversation, what's the one big question you have for Kirby right now as back in Athens, ready to get it going, get a chance to ask Kirby a question tomorrow? What's on your mind related to that?
Oh, gosh, yeah. I mean, just taking it all in. I mean, a lot of times when you get a chance to observe practice, you see a guy or two that'll just jump out at you, and I guess I'm as curious as anyone else to see how this team looks.
Yeah, when it comes to practice, what are you watching for? Where do your eyes go? What do you want to see?
Just size and athleticism. I mean, these Georgia offensive lines and defensive lines in the past have, really been big, dominant. You could just see, championship form. I mean, there's just a certain look that national championship programs have, and it always starts up front. So, I guess I'll be interested to see how athletic that offensive line looks and see what the, reloaded defensive line looks like. I know that's a big area of concern after you lose 3 first-round picks off the D-line. So just kind of eyeballing those guys up. I suppose my eyes will go to the linebackers as well, and Jamon Dumas-Johnson, and see who he's flanked by when they line up in drills with the first and second team, just to maybe get a feel for who's impressed Kirby and the staff during the offseason.
Yeah, to me, it's almost the exact opposite of there are certain sort of I don't want to call them superstar players, but they're, household names on the Georgia roster, and we spend a lot of time talking about them. But when it comes to these practice moments, it almost seems like some of the stuff that happens for some of the bigger names is sort of less interesting to me. And the stuff that I'm kind of most interested in doesn't really move the needle as much from sort of a casual fan standpoint. For instance, I'm very interested to see what happens at the guard spots. That's not going to sort of, get people necessarily real fired up, but I believe Georgia has one of the better centers in the country when it comes to Cedric Von Prawn-Granger, and I think that Georgia could be well taken care of when it comes to its offensive tackles. McClendon, who's been there for a while, and Broderick Jones, who seems ready to step up. But I am not quite so sure what's happening there at guard, and some of that's related to Tate Ratledge's health. But I do believe this offensive line this year has a chance to be better than it was a year ago, and it's the guard spots where I do think that can happen and kind of pave a way for a little bit of an upgrade for the UGA rushing attack, and kind of seeing who's either, kind of taking the forefront there or listening to what folks, like Kirby Smart say about all of that. But that's one of those things for me that's not the sexiest topic, I'll admit, but seeing what happens at guard, I think is one of the most important things in terms of determining, just what the ceiling is for this Georgia offense this year. Do you agree with that?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I know Warren Erickson's a capable guy, and, we've heard a lot about Xavier Truss. There's been some speculation maybe Amarius Mims moves inside. I'd be interested to see if that happens. But, I'm with you. I mean, I think that offensive line is really pivotal. I think all the other pieces are in place when you look at the skill position players, and certainly, Stetson Bennett's, a grown man. I mean, he'll be 25 years old this season. This is his 6th year. So it would appear to me that everything else is in place at Georgia. Just need to make sure that offensive line is as good as you and I think it is.
And then you mentioned the linebacker spot. I mean, I think most people expect Jamon Dumas-Johnson to at least be a capable starter. And I've made the comparison before that, in the second year for a guy like Dumas-Johnson, Nakobe Dean in his second year wasn't the player that he became in his third. Roquan Smith in his second year wasn't the player that he became in his third. So even if the sky is the limit for Jamon Dumas-Johnson, that may not be until a year 3 type thing until you really see that. That's what previous great linebackers at Georgia have kind of looked like. But the expectation is he would at least be a capable starter, and then you start looking at what does that mean for the other one of those interior linebacker spots? Is it Ismail Mondon back from injury, kind of living up to some of the accolades that he had as a recruit? Xavier Sori's not too far behind in terms of some of that sort of, pre-UGA rival attention. Veteran players like Ryan Davis and Tresman Marshall. If I'm kind of going down that list of the position battles, the jockeying for playing time that I think is the most interesting, inside linebacker, because of how valuable a positioning group it was for Georgia a year ago and because of how important it's been on Kirby's best teams, inside linebacker might be next on my list there.
Yeah, I'd agree with you, and I like Jamon Dumas-Johnson a lot. I mean, I think he brings a whole nother element. I know Nakobe was, really fast sideline to sideline, but I look at Dumas-Johnson as a guy that really brings the load, really hits hard, and, I'm excited about him. I think he could be an all-conference kind of guy this year.
Yeah, it could very well be. And then, obviously, that'd be, certainly very good news if that's the case, because as I said before, you look at those best Kirby teams, they sort of had that, strong play at the inside linebacker spot. And then for me, beyond that, in the secondary, You're obviously trying to figure out what's going to happen at cornerback opposite Keely Ringo. And you got a couple of other position battles that are at least going to be, pretty intense there in their own right. Darien Kennedy filled a big role for this team a year ago. Kendrick kind of quietly did what he was supposed to do. Got a lot of attention coming to Georgia once the season began. It's almost like he didn't get as much attention as at the level of play I think he had maybe even deserved. And that kind of becomes another spot where I think you're, once again, sort of paying pretty close attention to what's happening there.
Yeah, I really like Dylan Everett there. I'll be interested to see what Kamari Lassiter does. I think he didn't play in the game. I think Kirby said he was ill, but I'll be interested to see what happens there as well. I mean, because you're really only as good as your corners in Kirby's game. The way he likes to bring pressure and sometimes leave those corners out there and on islands, or in the case of the match zone. I mean, it requires so much coordination, and how quickly can these guys really get up to speed?
Yeah, I mean, we'll certainly be watching that very, very closely. I was joking about this before you came on, or at least talking about this a little bit. I sort of get the impression as that we head towards the start of the year that a lot of things for Georgia right now feel to me a lot like they did a year ago, where I think Georgia was sort of undervalued going into last season, and I sort of get the impression right now they're kind of undervalued again. I'm not certainly saying that this season's going to end the way the last season's did. You have to obviously go out there and play the games to determine that. But that's sort of the impression that I'm getting right now, is that, hey, maybe Georgia's being overlooked more than the reigning national champion probably should be. What do you think about that?
Well, that's interesting because on the one hand, they're a preseason number 3. That's pretty strong. But on the other hand, it doesn't seem like they're given much of a chance to win the title. It kind of seems like for a lot of folks, Alabama and everyone else, and if Bryce Young stays healthy, I can understand that. I mean, Will Anderson is a really special player, and they bring back Battle, and they took one of Georgia's most explosive receivers away with Burton, and the Georgia Tech running back Gibbs is certainly a talent. So I understand that, and I even understand a lot of the love for Ohio State with C.J. Stroud. So I think people oftentimes focus a lot on offense, and there were times last year when the Georgia offense didn't look so great. It was good enough when it needed to be, and I think that's going to be key this year. I think this offense can take a step, and I think they probably will. But will they take enough of a step to be able to beat an Alabama and Ohio State? That just depends on how quickly this defense grows as the season progresses. So, on the one hand, I agree with you that maybe people aren't giving Kirby enough credit when you look at 5 top 7 finishes in a row. But on the other hand, they are starting the season preseason number 3, and I don't know that I could vote them any higher than that in good conscience at this point.
But I guess that takes us back to something we talked about before, like why is it just sort of unanimously assumed that Ohio State's better than Georgia? Frankly, I don't care about the Georgia-Alabama comparison because we'll see them play head-to-head if all things work according to plan, and opinions will be rendered right or wrong based on what happens on the field. But interesting to me that somehow Ohio State is sort of unanimously given benefits of the doubt and unanimously benefiting from the assumption that they're just better than UGA. Why do you think that is, Mike?
I think most people, like I said, focus on offense. I think last year was a bit of an outlier. Typically, the best offensive teams win championships, and last year it was the best defensive team. It's been a long time since we could say it was the best defensive team. I mean, you look at the previous championship teams with Mac Jones and Trevor Lawrence and Joe Burrow and Deshaun Watson, and Stetson Bennett doesn't fit that mold. But he's good enough, and I think he's the starter at Georgia. And when you pair him with a defense that I believe ranks among the best of all time, that's good enough to win. But you lost 15 players to the NFL. That was a record number of guys. You lost 5 first-round NFL draft picks off your defense, and that was a record number of guys. So, I think people look at that, and then I think you also look at the fact that there's never been a 2-loss team that's made the college football playoff. And so basically, if we're saying that Alabama's the best, which I think most people would agree heading into the season, based on what they have returning, that seems logical enough. Then you've got to basically think that Georgia would have to run the table, lose in the SEC championship game, and still make the playoffs. And yeah, I would say the odds are against that, based on history. When Ohio State, on the other hand, I think we feel like there's less competition. There's more of a runway for them to get in. And I'd say probably the same thing about Clemson, Brandon. So I think it has to do with being in the SEC with Alabama and maybe losing so many guys to the NFL draft. And, really there's no precedent for a team to lose as much talent as Georgia has and be as good as it was the year before.
It's our Georgia Farm Bureau Insider Update, our practice report with Mike Griffin. Of course, we know as we get ready for the football season, to all of us, college football is more than a game. And when it comes to Georgia Farm Bureau, they understand that as well. When it comes to your home and your auto insurance and things like that, you want more than an insurance provider there as well. That is what Georgia Farm Bureau is. Living and working in communities just like ours all across the state of Georgia, taking good care of all the folks here around the state of Georgia. That's what Georgia Farm Bureau is all about. They are always the home team, and they're available for you online at gfbinsurance.com. That's gfbinsurance.com. Taking care of us here on DawgNation Daily each week with our buddy Mike Griffith, and also taking care of you for all your insurance needs. Check out GFB Insurance for a lot more on that. That's gfbinsurance.com. Mike, good stuff. Look forward to reading you more there at DawgNation.com, and we will chat again very soon.
Appreciate it, BA.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
I'm not hearing anything. There we go. Now we're back and running here. SEC Through, transitioning there from our buddy Mike Griffith. Let me just say this very quickly. I am not willing to stipulate that Alabama's better than Georgia. I'm just not. Why would I? Now, that's not the same thing as saying I'm guaranteeing that Georgia's going to beat Alabama. Obviously, I wouldn't do that because I got too much respect for your intelligence to guarantee something that we haven't seen. These two teams played twice a year ago. Bama won once. Georgia won once. Obviously, this is an ongoing battle that's been waged, and it's going to probably continue to be waged for a few more years, you would think, at least. But the idea that, nothing you can do about Alabama, they're just the best team in the country, why is that true? I mean, it might be. It may end up being true. I mean, if you picked Alabama to win the national championship, you've been right pretty frequently because they've won plenty of national championships. But this idea that before the year begins, I guess you just sort of know Alabama's better than Georgia, and I guess Ohio State probably is too. Why would any Georgia fan begin the season with that kind of concession to begin all of this? Simply not the case. Now, maybe it works out that way. Obviously, it's really hard to repeat as national champions. No one's done it in darn near a decade, I guess. I think it's been exactly 10 years, in fact. No one's won the back-to-back national championships. So it's not an easy thing to do. But I think the correct posture for Georgia fans going into the season is simply to concede nothing, simply to assume nothing, simply to let it play out on the field, and expectations being just as high right now as they were a year ago. Of course they should be. And by the way, probably in 2023 and 2024, the expectations will kind of remain the same there on that there as well. And yes, I know they lost 15 draft picks. But it's not like Georgia lost like half dozen more draft picks than most national championships lose. They may have had the most, but it's not like the second most was like 9. I mean, most national champions in the playoff era have had about a half dozen first-round picks and, certainly, high double digits over, or not high double digits, but double-digit draft picks overall. So while Georgia may have technically had the most draft picks, it's not like it's dramatically the most. It's just not. So if you're a Georgia fan, you have every right to begin the year, I believe, this year, assuming that everything was on the table for you a year ago that no one seemed to think you're going to be able to win. It's right back there for you for this upcoming year there as well. Kind of an interesting statement from Nick Saban we'll get to in a moment. Before that, though, let's go cruise around the SEC courtesy of our friends at Royal Caribbean. Something else that fires me up, great savings right now from Royal Caribbean, a great chance for you this week. You got to take advantage of this week. This week to get involved with a great deal. How about kids sail free? You want to take your family on a cruise vacation with you? Kids sail free opportunity. Obviously a much easier way to do that. We might can bring that music down just a tiny slight bit. But yeah, kids sail free, great opportunity to be able to do that. And also, how about 30% off all the folks going on a sailing? Royal Caribbean's got that for you right now there as well. So a great vacation. A Royal Caribbean cruise is that. And certainly a great deal makes it even better. Our friends at the Cruise and Vacation Authority can get you going on this, so you can find them online, tcava.com. That's their website, tcava.com. You can also give them a call, 770-952-8300. That's 770-952-8300. That'll get you going for our friends at the Cruise and Vacation Authority. You can help you get some great savings when it comes to Royal Caribbean. All right, let me show you this. So Nick Saban, I guess it was on the McElroy and Kublik radio show. This is the sports radio show over there in Birmingham. He makes an appearance there on that. And Michael Carvel found the quote. He's going to show it to us on the screen here. Listen, I don't want to make too much of a quote when I wasn't listening to the interview. But Saban saying, last year we had kind of a rebuilding year. Funny, I don't remember anybody saying that going into last year. I don't remember it being sold as a rebuilding year. It's funny. Look, Nick Saban is what he is. He's like everybody else. Like, he is great. I got no problem telling you he's the greatest college football coach of all time. I got no problem with that. But he's like a lot of these Alabama fans. No matter how much he's won, all it takes is one loss to make him sound like a loser. And this is the perfect example of that no matter how much winning you have in your blood and your DNA, one loss sort of causes loser talk to kind of creep in. And Nick Saban's public statements after having lost the national championship, it's all basically just been loser talk. It's, it was a rebuilding year for us, we had injuries, we lost because, bad apples who weren't bought into the team, now they've moved on. A lot of scapegoating, a lot of blame game, a lot of stuff like that. Nick Saban is the all-time great. He is a winner, the likes of which that most of us could never even dream of achieving in our own lives. And we'd be lucky for our favorite college football team to even have a taste of what Saban has had. But after one loss to Georgia, he sounds like just like every other loser that's out there, blaming something on somebody else, downplaying everything. And I don't want to make too much about one comment because I wasn't listening to the interview for the full context of it. But honestly, that's message board stuff. And Nick Saban doesn't sound any different than one of these other Alabama fans spewing what they're constantly spewing. So nonetheless, that's Nick Saban there from the McElroy and Kublik radio show as found by our producer, Michael Carvel. Now, speaking of Alabama, they did get some good news yesterday, and this is where, around here we have obviously partisan beliefs, and, we're, clearly on the Georgia side of things here, but we also call balls and strikes. Alabama has been on quite a heater in recruiting. Now, you can't deny that. They have been on a heater and a half when it comes to recruiting as of late, including yesterday flipping away a pretty impressive tight end commit from Ohio State. Ty Lockwood's his name. It's a pretty good, playmaking style tight end. A little bit interesting in the fact that Ohio State's actually dealt with a couple of high-profile decommits lately. The flip here to Alabama, they lost the defensive back the other day. I said this with Connor Riley yesterday. I think it's way too early to fully know what the exact narrative of the 2023 recruiting class is. Some of this is still evolving, and sometimes it's sort of contradictory information. For instance, Bama's very hot now, but there was a time in this 23 cycle when they weren't quite getting everyone they wanted, especially along the offensive line. That kind of comes to mind here on this, but you can't deny it lately. Caleb Downs, the two running backs, Lockwood now the tight end. They've been on a little bit of a run as of late, and you got to give them respect for that. Then there's this. So yesterday, David Cloninger, who's actually been on our show before, I think he's a good guy, he wrote a great story for, I think it's The State he works for, one of the newspapers over there in South Carolina, about, and the headline's one of those things, it's like, mascot name change due to controversy. And you're sort of primed and conditioned in this day and age to assume this must be some sort of like political thing or something like that. And it couldn't have been any further from the truth. Like, this is like just sort of old school SEC Southern drama about like two families fighting over this chicken and how the chicken looks and like what the chicken's name's going to be if it doesn't look the way the old chicken looked. And like, this makes South Carolina seem like a very odd place, to be frank. But I still just loved every minute of it. And for those of us, I may put a link to this when I post the show at DawgNation.com because it's really worth reading. To me, it's just funny. And it's sort of the stuff we like about college football, right? It's like live chicken mascots and families who take care of the mascot, fighting with each other, almost like the Hatfields and the McCoys. And like, there's a one point in time where like the actual institution, the South Carolina Athletic Department, it's like, listen, The chicken doesn't belong to us. This is this isn't our chicken. We don't get to say what the name of it is. And the reason why I guess they're fighting over the name is because there's this like, I don't even call it like a plumage or whatever you call it, like basically like a thing on the head, like it's a bunch of hair type stuff. And the old people that owned it didn't think it should have that because it didn't look like a gamecock, like a true fighting chicken if it had this like stuff on its head. And these people wanted to leave it because it was more natural, and I guess it protects it from the sun. Honestly, I'm not an animal expert. I don't know. But it's just kind of a funny story. And it's sort of one of those things where like, we're going to really kill each other if the offseason doesn't end soon. If you got South Carolina fans fighting over, how a chicken looks and what to name the live chicken that stands there on the sidelines there for that. By the way, speaking of South Carolina, I thought they were rated way too low. They were like in the 50s of this CBS Sports. I mentioned off the top of the show, they're sort of like power ranking 131 teams. That's how big FBS is now. I thought CBS was kind of way too low in all of this. The other thing that kind of jumped out to me, which I think is kind of interesting, is I don't think you can discount the Georgia schedule as a real weapon for the Dogs here this year. This is just sort of one entity's opinion, CBS, just sort of being one group of folks weighing in on something. But according to CBS, in the regular season, the highest rated team that Georgia will play is Oregon at 14th in their power poll. And then after that, the next highest rated team they'll play is Kentucky at 23rd. And the next highest rated team they'll play is Tennessee at 24. So according to CBS, if you just sort of take this rating seriously, Georgia only plays one team ranked inside the top 20, no teams ranked inside the top 10, and 3 teams ranked inside the top 25. For a team like Georgia, that's a real weapon. And it's the kind of thing that if you want to be at your best come December, well, obviously it's better to play a more manageable schedule to do that. Now, listen, that may also make for some boring Saturdays where Georgia goes in and there's really not a whole lot of intrigue, and we'll end up arguing about, garbage time, fourth quarter, and how much the quarterback's getting to throw. I do realize there's a little bit of a downside to that from an entertainment standpoint. But if the goal here is to do what Georgia did a year ago, win the national championship, and if you take CBS seriously at all, which is at least worth considering as a data point, y'all, that's a real weapon for Georgia. They are very likely to be. At one point in time, I thought they might be, a single-digit favorite either at Mississippi State or at Kentucky. The truth is, I think that's still pretty likely to be double-digit point favorite. That Georgia's going to be a double-digit favorite, and maybe as much as 2 touchdowns in every game that it plays here this year. Now, listen, they lost as a big favorite in South Carolina in 2019, so nothing's guaranteed. You'll hear me say that kind of a lot. But nonetheless, that's kind of how this is going right now, that Georgia finding itself in really a very good position in terms of the schedule that it gets to play. The CBS ranking kind of gives you an example of that. We'll make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Now, I got something really cool I want to show you here in a moment. Before that, though, something else really cool I need to do. We've been doing this all week long. That's our Kroger 5-Star Kids winners. We've been announcing these winners, and I got to tell you, I got a chance to see some of these. We have other people on our team that see all of these. There is nothing more rewarding for the people that read these submissions than the stories we get to hear of like cool kids in our audience who are just doing good stuff. Like the thing that makes me so proud, enough, I'll take listeners however I can get them, of course, but the fact we got so many like strong families who are doing stuff together, starting school and getting ready to go have a great year. Like I take so much pride in knowing that's what our audience looks like. Happy families, doing good things, taking care of kids, growing up, becoming fine young men and women. That's just a good thing. And that's what kind of our Kroger 5-Star Kids contest gives us a chance to celebrate, including our winner today, Sam Hampton, who was nominated by his grandfather, William Hampton, a rising senior at Grayson High School, active in his high school ROTC program, attended a national leadership competition in Washington, D.C. over the summer. He's also active in his church. He's mentoring students. He's been on the tennis team. He's also dual enrolled at Grayson and Maxwell High School of Technology, so you're talking about a smart guy here there as well, getting ready for college. He wants to go to a 4-year college, maybe be in the ROTC there. And also, how about joining the Army, becoming a pilot there too? Don't you know we need good folks doing that. Well-mannered, his grandfather says, focused and compassionate. Indeed, the epitome of a 5-star kid. Sounds like it indeed. And thinking about serving our country, and boy, we need all that we can get. Sam Hampton seems like a great young man and a very fitting winner of our Kroger 5-star kids for today. So congratulations to him there on that. We'll have more winners later on this week. And as you're getting ready to go back to school, as Sam is right now, you can check out your local Kroger related to all of that. The snacks you need, the my kids eat so much. We got to have all that. School supplies, everything else. You can get that there at your local Kroger. All right, so let me do this. Yesterday was kind of a sad day. It's sort of an awkward transition when you kind of go from the sort of typical happy content to something that was more serious. But it was really sad yesterday. And I mentioned this on video. We mentioned this in the podcast yesterday there as well, that the great former Georgia running back Lars Tate passed away way too soon. He was only in his 50s, was battling cancer. Our buddy Chip Towers had a story on that at AJC.com. And this just sort of floored me because when I was coming of age as a Georgia fan back when I was a kid, kind of mid-'80s, like Lars Tate was my guy. And I don't know, you just sort of left a lot of heavy thoughts when something like this happens. And I showed this on Twitter yesterday. I want to show this to you. Pardon me for stepping away from the mic for a second. But so there was a time in the Lars Tate era when the Buttsmere Heritage Hall was first open. Now, this is not like one of those things for like special donors. Like anybody could do this there that day. And so I went with my grandparents to Athens that day. And if you're watching a video up here in the corner, it's always hard for me to kind of know how to point. But up here in the corner, that's me. Thank you for kind of zooming in on that. That's me with Lars Tate right there when I was just a kid. And, you know, people use the phrase where it sort of stops you in your tracks. Like going back and finding this yesterday, because I knew I had this somewhere. Like this really stopped me in my tracks because I remember this day like it was yesterday. Going to Athens, my grandparents took me. Down the bottom, you see me sitting in Vince Dooley's. This is back when Vince Dooley was still the coach of the team. I'm sitting in his chair in his office. I'm kicked back and relaxed. My grandparents let me do that. Probably wasn't supposed to, but they let me do that there that day. Posing with Lars Tate. I just loved this era of Georgia football. The team wasn't as successful as obviously this team is now, and it wasn't as successful as it had been before I was kind of old enough to know what was going on. But you couldn't have told me any different. I just loved Georgia football back then. I loved this day, getting to do that. And hearing the news about Tate yesterday made me think about the fact that, you know, my grandparents who took me to this event in Athens that day, they're no longer with me. And their son, my dad, he's not with me anymore either. And Lars Tate's not with us there as well. And as I mentioned, I'm younger in that picture than my son is now. It's like such a cliche to say, like, where does time go? But like literally, where does time go? And I am just so thankful for like happy memories as a Georgia fan. I'm so thankful that Lars Tate, who didn't know me from anything, was so nice to me back then. Like, you know, a lot of these Georgia players, you never know like how much kids, I was one then, look up to a lot of you. But that was the case. And I see Georgia players now doing this all the time. And it's so nice to see because I know how much that meant to me back when I was a kid. So I wanted to remember the life of Lars Tate. This was a very good football player and was a good player in the NFL. Ended up having a little bit of an injury situation that cut his career short, but second-round draft pick, really one of the guys that made RBU sort of what it is. You know, in the kind of the post-Herschel era, Tate was that guy. Shared some carries with Rodney Hampton in 87, but kind of had the team to him as kind of the lead guy in 86. Just a very good player and just gone way too soon. I know a lot of you felt the same way. I wanted to share that because I don't know. It was just really heavy on my mind as of yesterday. So to the family and friends of Lars Tate, to those who knew him, we sincerely give our prayers to you and, you know, to all of DawgNation. It feels like we've done this kind of thing too much in recent years. And so to all of you, you know, let's cherish every memory. Let's enjoy every moment because nothing is unfortunately guaranteed. So that heavy on our minds today. Now, once again, sort of awkward transition kind of back to our typical stuff here on that. And obviously we love having fun around here and we love the chance to do that. We appreciate our friends at the Finish Long Drink that let us do this. And one of the things that we really enjoyed and have enjoyed the last few weeks is we'll do this again on Friday. We do our big finish courtesy of the Finish Long Drink. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to send me in, and we had some great submissions for this last week. I had so much fun. if you're enjoying the Finish Long Drink, if you're out there having a good time with that this summer, tailgating season coming up here, doing that kind of stuff, wherever you're taking the Finish Long Drink with you, we want to show you off and show all the fun that you're having as a part of our big finish coming up on Friday. So you may be hearing me right now saying, well, BA, I haven't tried the Finish Long Drink yet. Well, good news is you can do that today. TheLongDrink.com is the website. You can go there and you can find out where you can pick some up. Long Drink Cranberry, Long Drink Strong. You want the Long Drink Traditional. That's the blue can with the gin kick, the grapefruit flavor, all of that available for you. And you can find out where. Beverage store. I was playing golf at Eastlake the other day. I know I was fancier course than I deserve, but right there at the halfway house, they got Long Drink, along with all the other, great choices. You got the Finish Long Drink right there. A lot of folks were enjoying that over there at Eastlake the other day. So you're playing golf, it's there. You're going on the lake, it's there. It can be just great stuff. So go try it if you haven't, thelongdrink.com. And if you are trying and you are enjoying it, then let us know, and we'll show you off coming up on Friday as a part of our Big Finish, the Big Finish, presented by the Finish Long Drink each and every Friday right here on DawgNation Daily. So no golden shoe today. Just kind of wanted to kind of allow the look back on a great fun era for those of us who were kids at that time of Georgia football to kind of be that version of that, and really excited about this current version of Georgia football, as we said before. Start to get a little fired up and ready to go for the upcoming season, and start to show a little teeth here related to what maybe is being said out there, and a chance to kind of push back against some of that. And as Kirby Smart has said before, talking with your helmets, that's what the Georgia team wants to do, and they'll be doing that September 3rd. It's going to be here before you know it. Let me tell you who's not doing a whole lot of talking with their helmets right now. It's those lousy, stinking Gators. About 4,955 days since they have won a national championship. And guess what? We're heading back to Jacksonville. We'll probably be taking some Finish Long Drink with us for the cocktail party, but we're heading back to Jacksonville 87 days from right now, enjoying a chance to beat down on the Florida Gators once again. It's DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. We'll see you again tomorrow. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. They'll do that for you today. And for our video audience who maybe want to see little BA, young BA one more time, we'll give folks a chance to do that. There you go. So this is me. Like I said, it's hard for me to point for some reason. This is me with Lars Tate. Down there at the bottom, you see me. You want to throw the still screen up there more? Maybe people can see that better. So that's me down at the bottom, sitting at Vince Dooley's desk. This would have been prior to the '87 season. This would have been this. I think that's when the Butts-Mehre Heritage Hall opened. I'm hoping that the statute of limitations has elapsed in terms of me trespassing in Coach Dooley's office, or on the field where I was not supposed to be, or in the team meeting room there with the depth chart. I've always been a little bit of a guy to kind of weasel my way into places I'm not supposed to be. But all of that was on my mind in a huge way. I almost have a little bit of a mullet in that picture too, which is, if you look at that one picture on the left, almost a little bit of a mullet right there, kind of coming down there on the neck just a bit. But nonetheless, kind of a fun look back for me on a really fun era of Georgia football that I was very thankful to have experienced. And I'm just so glad that my grandparents gave that to me, chance to go to those games. My dad did the same thing, just glad for that. Like, where would I be if I didn't have, that Georgia football experience in my life? Hard to know and not fun to imagine. All right, so let's get your comments. And hope you're doing good. On YouTube, Worm says he thinks that Tennessee takes Bama to the wire. I've told you this before. One of the things I think has been really interesting this offseason is, and I realize that gambling is not everybody's cup of tea, and that's totally fine. To me, gambling is most interesting from the standpoint of, this is what people who are willing to put their money where their mouth is, this is what they think about college football. There is extra weight connected to an opinion that comes with a monetary loss if you're wrong. I just think that's why I think gambling is interesting. When the point spreads in certain like Las Vegas casinos first opened up, Tennessee was only about a 6.5 point underdog to Alabama. Now that was immediately bet up, double digits. But there has been a little bit of gambling respect out there for Tennessee. There has been some of that, and you say, what does that mean for Tennessee coming into Athens in November? I don't think very much. I think that's late in the season, and I think that, after the natural attrition of injuries, a Tennessee roster that's already a little thin gets a little thinner. Georgia dealing with its own injuries probably, because that's the story of most football seasons. Still has enough roster depth to probably overcome that. I also think that Georgia kind of dragged Tennessee around its own stadium last year. Why would that change all that much here in this stadium? So I don't know that, Tennessee is yet, or maybe ever, good enough to compete with Georgia. But in terms of being dangerous enough to play somebody close, they very might well. And in Neyland Stadium, hosting Alabama, that game being a little closer than the experts think it could be, then maybe that's possible. Jonathan Aaron says, with all the way too early drafts, why does Robert Beal not get as much love as everyone else? He didn't get a starting role until after the Florida game and still led the team in sacks. Yet no doubt the statistical performance was there from Beal a year ago, but this is a guy who's a little bit enigmatic, I think. There was a period of time when he was thinking about transferring away from Georgia. And, even go back to sort of his high school tenure, there's a little bit of an enigmatic nature to Beal as a high school player. That while the raw talent seemed to be there, I do think there have been some moments when people have kind of wondered, okay, what is Robert Beal as a football player? That's one of the reasons why his emergence here last year and coming back for this final year at UGA, hard to believe, he was a 2017 signee for Georgia. For all the talk about like how long Stetson Bennett's been here, Robert Beal has been here for a minute there as well. That's one of the, I think, the cool things about his emergence is that he gets a chance to kind of help tell his own story now. So part of the reason why I think that, draft type stuff, maybe not paying too close attention to him as of yet, is because I think it's been a little bit hard to know what Robert Beal is, but he can answer those questions kind of emphatically right now. And there are probably other examples of this too, where, certain guys are just late bloomers. Now Beal's not a late bloomer from the standpoint that he was a pretty high value recruit when he came to Georgia. But in terms of being the player that he can be, some guys are just late bloomers, and maybe that's Beal's case. But if he does follow up on the statistical performance last year with another kind of season like that this year, trust me when I tell you the draft scouts will notice. They will. Jake Shipe's pointing out that Jay's favorite team, Ole Miss, is playing Georgia next year. He says, will I be on some kind of list search to make sure I'm not throwing stuff at Kiffin? No, I don't plan on throwing anything. But it is interesting that Jay finally gets to see his buddy Lane Kiffin right here in the state of Georgia. So I'm sure he's already excited about that. I'm sure he's already very excited about that. Kayla Myers says, I love to hear you dogging Ohio State. The media always seems to drool over them. He says, I want to beat them so bad. Yeah, this is one of those things where, sometimes it just sort of really is that simple. And I think I try to lay out a couple of clear examples, is that Georgia's offense last year was actually really very good. And it's sort of treated in the offseason as if it was bad. Conversely, Ohio State's defense last year was terrible by national elite standards. It was terrible. And as I kind of laid out a minute ago, sort of treated as if it's already good. I mean, like the anonymous coach, that's a very damning statement in light of what we say is kind of sort of a weird bias in favor of Ohio State. I don't think it's intentional. I think it's kind of implied. But this idea, their one issue's already been fixed. It's already been fixed. No game's been played. We saw them get embarrassed by a finesse, pillow soft defense at the end of the regular season last year against Michigan. But just by making a hire, it's already been fixed. Already been fixed. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And that's not to say it won't actually be good, because Jim Knowles is a really good hire. We follow this stuff. We pay attention to college football. We don't just, come out here and, shoot from the hip. I love the sport. I watched Jim Knowles' defense a year ago. I, knew it was a big deal when Ohio State hired him. I'm not saying it's not a big-time hire. What I am saying is dramatic, instantaneous transformation is not as easy as anonymous coach thinks it is. So, yeah. The Biscuit, going back and remembering some fun times from the 90s, which is kind of a nice thing to think about. Foster Moss says, it looked like I was in heaven there in Vince Dooley's office. Yeah, it was. I mean, and like when you're a kid, something like that is like, I mean, it was like seeing like sort of hallowed ground, like the fancy, like a wood paneled sort of mahogany, what is it, like Ron Burgundy says about his apartment, it smells of rich mahogany. Like, trust me, as a little kid growing up in Hall County, that's the nicest place I'd ever been before. When the Butts-Mehre Heritage Hall first opened, I'd never seen anything that nice. Vince Dooley's office with these like, luxurious touches, the leather chair and the deep, mahogany wood desks, the fancy nameplate, a couple of those, Coach of the Year trophy, exiting to the back of a patio, looking over the practice field there. I mean, that was as luxurious a place I'd ever seen in my life. So yeah, you better believe that was the case. Wally Smith says, I'd like to be at practice watching. Yeah, I feel like that. I'll be very candid. Hopefully y'all, know me as a very honest person. So I do some of this. Like, I'm not going to be at practice on Thursday. I believe there will be a media viewing period. I do this some. I have probably seen half dozen, maybe 10 practices, or the viewing period, which is never the entire practice. But it's like an 8, or in some cases it's like 16 minutes, but it's somewhere between like, say, let's call it like 8 and 20 minutes. That's about how long the practice viewing period is. I don't mind telling you this. I think that watching practice well in a 10 to 15 minute viewing period is a little bit of a skill set you have to develop, because it can be very easy to get fixated on one thing and not see anything else. Or it can also be easy to try to see a lot of different things and end up sort of feeling like you saw nothing. So for the people who do this, I'm not a beat reporter. That's not really been a profession I've aspired to be in. I have respect for beat reporters to read their content, but that's just not what I do for a living. It's never what I've wanted to do for a living. I've always wanted to do this kind of thing for a living. But for the beat reporter who's been kind of doing this for a while and, going to these practices for a while, I do think you learn to exercise that muscle a little bit of, okay, how do I get something out of this experience? Am I going to try to watch everything? Am I going to take roll and see if somebody's missing? Am I going to watch one thing and learn one thing about one position group? You kind of have to have a plan going in. It's one of those things where it can just sort of be overwhelming, all the football that's going on. You kind of want to take that in. Some of you who are boosters kind of know the same thing. Now, the difference being a booster, though, is if you're watching, like, say, the McGill scrimmage, which will be coming up probably in a couple of weeks, that's a long enough period of time, and that's organized in such a way that's a little bit like watching a game. And so I think it's a little bit easier to kind of process what's going on in kind of a McGill scrimmage situation, or for some of you who've been to a different kind of scrimmage. Some of you are coaches and you go to like the coaches, clinic scrimmage and things like that. I mean, some of you have seen like full Georgia practices before, full scrimmages before. And if it's organized in a certain kind of way, it can be a little easier to process what's going on. But like the media portion that gets viewed, during the regular Georgia practice is usually kind of a drill period. So it's almost always like running backs way on the far side, so a lot of times it'd be like quarterbacks throwing like play polish drills to receivers, kind of like right in the middle. Tight ends are always fairly close. Outside linebackers, defensive linemen, they're always fairly close. Far end of the other field oftentimes will be kind of like, the defensive backs. And so you have a lot of ground to cover if you want to see everything. And if you've got ADD or something like that, it can be really easy to stand out there and feel like you saw nothing. So that's just kind of on my mind, is that there's sort of an art to watching practice well. And some of you have seen that. You kind of know that. Frank Patterson says everybody has a plan until they get hit with the toss sweep. Makes me think of the great former Georgia Tight end Troy Sadowski, who sometimes joins us in our comment section, who loved blocking on those toss sweeps during his time there at UGA. Loved those for sure. Paul Moon, good to see you here. Good to see our buddy the Biscuit in here there as well. Joshua Langford, this is actually a really good take. He says, Ohio State is becoming the Notre Dame and Texas of college football. They produce nothing and people expect them everything out of them. I think that's a really good take. And I think you ought to put a pin in that. I think you'll hold on to that. Because, listen, a lot of us follow recruiting pretty closely, and so we know a lot of the players on the Ohio State roster because they've won a lot of big recruiting battles. And so one of the things you've probably heard me say in the past a little bit is, hey, I may not like the Big Ten, but, Ohio State's probably an elite team. I've given at least some begrudging respect in the direction of Ohio State. But what if they don't do it again this year? What if they are this year similar to what they were a year ago? Comparing them to a Notre Dame or a Texas, two teams with relatively high levels of talent that don't win squat, that's not a bad comparison at all. Now, they have a chance to do something about that this year. They can do something to answer those critics here this year and kind of be back in the national conversation again. But if they don't, if they lose in the playoff, if they don't make the playoff, which they didn't do a year ago, then saying they're a little bit like a Notre Dame, they're a little bit like a Texas, that's not a bad opinion at all. I actually like that. I like that a lot. Jonathan Aaron says on the subject of like sort of injury timelines, yeah, I mean, I thought that Kirby gave some decent stuff on that at media days. It'll be interesting to see how much of that's changed here for this upcoming week. But you definitely know injuries will be a big part of all that. You definitely do. Frank Patterson says we want to send items, cards, gifts, or in G. Greg's Mail Boys case, hush money to the show. Where can we find the address? That's really funny. That's really funny. Hit me up on Twitter at DawgNation Daily. We'll make sure we can get you anything for our buddy G. Grace we need to. The Green Soldier says, like a Texas BA? Come on. I guess what I'm saying is this, is that if the big knock on Texas is they're not winning to the level of their talent, then to agree that's true about Ohio State too. Now you can say, well, they're still winning way more than Texas is. That's fine. You may be right about that. But if you want to say, if they were to duplicate what they did last year, this Ohio State team a year ago had no business not making the playoff, right? But they're just too soft. They just got pushed around. And yeah, I know they're on the road and the weather's a factor and things like that, but Ohio State always beats Michigan because they have better talent level, overwhelmingly better talent level. Last year they didn't. So I don't mind putting them in the category. They may not be as extreme an offender of overratedness as Texas is. That's fine. But in terms of the, first degree, second degree, third degree version, which I never quite know which is the worst. Is it first degree or is it third degree? I never quite know. But, are they a degree of the same version if the same thing happens again? I got no problem with that. And stuff like this is what the real rivalry in college football is about to be. Like in the future, I think we are likely to see certain SEC teams as Georgia's opposition. But the enemy is going to be that bunch over in the Big Ten because they're trying to take food off of our tables, so to speak. In the sort of battle for finite resources and the battle for, the stuff that really matters in life. It's a winner-take-all type game type thing. So in the future, we may think of some of these, knucklehead SEC teams as nothing more than the opposition. But the real enemy is going to be, those folks up north. Howard Eubanks says, has Saban joined the NIL spending pool? I mean, you understand why people would say that because they weren't getting nothing for a while and they've gotten everything as of late. But I just think it's still a little too early to know kind of what all this means. DT says that Lars had a great mustache. He did. It's kind of fun to see mustaches back in such a big way now. Even Todd Hartley's got one now, which I think is actually a good look for him. But the mustache is back in a big way, and he was definitely sporting one back then. There's something about that just sort of makes you seem harder to tackle, right? I mean, if you're rocking some really well done facial hair, to me it makes you just a little harder to tackle. Bill Russell says all this is fun, but I'm ready to watch some curb stomping. I'm telling you right now, it's sort of the same thing, and I feel like we do this every year, where you know how after a certain point in training camp, and over the course of my life, I've probably seen more NFL training camps than I have seen college training camps, sort of weirdly speaking, even though a good portion of my life's been spent covering college football. NFL teams are just way more open for practice. I've seen, over the course of my life, more NFL practices than I've seen college practices, strangely enough. But eventually in the NFL, guys just fight, right? You have training camp fights all the time, and it's hot, right? And guys just eventually just sort of get tired of practicing against each other, and they're ready to like take on somebody else wearing a different colored uniform. I think the fan version of that kind of also goes on right now too, where some of us have been like participating in these intramural squabbles, arguing about depth charts and gosh knows the 9,000th reconsideration of Stetson Bennett's championship season. And it just gets to a certain point where we're sort of ready to stop doing drills against ourselves and go out there and fight against an Ohio State fan or fight against a Bama fan or whatever else. I think we're sort of to that point. Senior Dog 54 says, I believe Tennessee and Kentucky will be in the top 15 when we play them. Also, Oregon could finish in the top 10. Our schedule is fine. So I think that you have an important caveat to what you said there, and I don't know if you meant this intentionally or not. I'm assuming that you did. Top 15 when Georgia plays them? Maybe so. Top 15 on the other side of having played Georgia, maybe at the end of the season, that may be hard to achieve. I could see both Tennessee and Kentucky finishing in the top 25. I don't think of them as top 15 level teams, but they could be rated that high when they play Georgia and see that ranking sort of regress after the whipping they're going to tote. As far as Oregon goes, I talked about this with Connor yesterday. I got no problem with the assumption that Oregon's top 20 may be in a top 15 level team. I believe I have Oregon as one of the 10 best teams in the country. I don't think that I do. They have some clear program strengths. They're very good at linebacker, for instance. And I think that Dan Lanning's probably a really good coach. And by the way, he's killing it in recruiting, so good for him on that. Or at least, got a huge win with Dante Moore the other day. But I don't think that Oregon's one of the 10 best teams in the country. And if I had to assume, like if they're one of the 10 best teams in the country, then there's a chance you think they win the Pac-12. And I do not think they win the Pac-12. I think Utah probably does. Is Oregon better than USC? Maybe. Does Oregon play USC in the regular season? How quickly can I look up their schedule? I'm sure some of you already know this, and you're shouting this in the comments section. But I'm sort of pot committed to pull this up. So give me just 1 second. Does Oregon play USC? It does not. Oregon does not play USC this year. That's a pretty easy schedule. BYU semi-tricky, although that's a home game. They host UCLA. Late season game against Utah. That's a pretty easy schedule. Easier schedule than I thought. So I guess I'm going to stick with my answer, but that's a little easier schedule. Let us see. Hemingway says, at this point preseason, I see no evidence that Ohio State can beat Bama or Georgia. Yeah, and listen, I'm sort of fine with somebody making the case for something. For instance, like we have, I know this may be hard to imagine, but we really do have some good Bama fans that communicate with us from time to time. And if they want to come on the show and make a case of their team winning the national championship, it's not like there's no evidence to support that. I mean, of course you can support that case, and it's a fine argument, right? That's what we do. We have these arguments, and of course you can sort of, support that if you want to. And if you want to make a case for Ohio State, I mean, it's not like you can't make the case at all. I mean, how many teams in this country are going to have a better quarterback, running back combination they're going to have, plus the really good wide receivers? That's obviously a great place to start when it comes to building a team. My issue is not that somebody thinks Ohio State's good. That's not my issue, because somebody's always going to think virtually anything. My issue is everyone's in agreement. I always have antennas go up when everybody agrees on something. And that's true in all walks of life, although I'm not going to get into that right now. I am literally the sort of, what's the Warren Buffett line? When other folks are panicked, I am greedy. And when other folks are greedy, I'm panicked. That's just sort of the mindset in which I live my life on. And the fact that everybody seems to be sort of greedy and trying to grab as much Ohio State as they can, honestly, if we're treating this as a stock market or as a betting market, I would be panicked right now about how sure everyone is about Ohio State. I would. And the fact that everyone is seemingly so panicked on Georgia's behalf about, oh my gosh, how can they replace all they've lost on defense? This level of panic makes me assume that the public is as wrong about this as it is about most things. Let's see what else. Cam Hasty and Hemingway and folks some of the Georgia regular season. I don't mind telling you. I think it's appropriate to set expectations going into a season. If Georgia loses a regular season game, I mean, I just think you can call it. I mean, listen, you never know like how injuries are going to factor in stuff like this, but it would be something pretty close to a disaster if Georgia were to lose a regular season game. I mean, now you can still be 11-1 and win the SEC and be just fine. It won't eliminate you from playoff competition. But Georgia, given the schedule that it appears to be playing, given the level of strength it appears to have, I mean, the one advantage Georgia has over Alabama, maybe it has many, but the one we know it has is Alabama has to play an SEC West schedule, and Georgia gets to play the schedule it gets to play. Bama's going to be pretty close to the same level of favorite in every game, this season that Georgia's going to be. Maybe you say there's more balance East-West than there used to be, but, Georgia needs to take this schedule for a spin, I believe. And that doesn't mean that some team won't rise up and challenge UGA one day. It's hard to go the whole season without being challenged by somebody. But still. Let me go to Facebook. I haven't been there yet. And I'm sure they're not happy. Let's see if it pulls up on the laptop today, because the other day it didn't. So I know this is 2 days in a row. I've been very late getting to Facebook, and so I deserve criticism. That's the case. All right. And let's see how it goes. Here we go. On Facebook. Ken Holcomb, thanks for the kind words about the cool pictures. Yeah, I'm just really grateful for that kind of stuff. I really am. I'm grateful for those good memories and thankful for pictures and stuff like that. I really am. Now, this is back in the day when picture meant film. You had to put film in a camera. But I'm thankful to have it. Drew Miller says we missed you, BA, and John Foster gave me some criticism. Listen, I totally take the L for this. I have nothing I can do but stand here and get justifiable criticism because I'm way too late getting to Facebook. Way too late. I think sometimes some of the people have such good comments that I sort of get fired up. And that ends up making things last longer than it should. Let's see what else. Rick Martin says UGA will lose a regular season game this year. Rick, which one do you think it will be, or do you just think it will be one at some point in time? One of the bets I would be willing to make. Now, will I actually make this bet? I don't know. But one of the bets I would be willing to make, I'd be willing to throw a few dollars on the Georgia over at 11.5. Now, here's one thing you haven't heard me do. And I don't typically do this because it's just sort of, I don't know why. But I haven't made any kind of end of season prediction for Georgia. I haven't predicted the SEC championship, predicted the national championship because I honestly just don't know. I could say something, but I'd just be saying it to be saying it. But would I be willing to bet the Georgia over on 11.5? I think I probably would. I think I probably would be willing to do that. Now, if I bet on sports, this is low limit betting, so I'm not talking about I'm putting 10 dimes on it. That's not what I'm doing. But if I were to make a bet, yes, I would. I would be willing to bet the Georgia over at 11.5. I would. Marshall Fleming says Oregon will not be good this year, changing from faster, smaller team to power team. Look at Nick's first year at Bama. Kirby's first year at UGA. Look for the same type of first season for the Ducks. Well, but here's one thing to consider on this, though, Marshall, and I kind of agree with you, but remember who the coach was before Lannon got there. Mario Cristobal was a physical coach. The problem with Oregon is, and some of you kind of know this, is that Oregon was a little bit like the Georgia of the Pac-12. The days of Chip Kelly and finesse and stuff like that, that's not really what Cristobal was. That Cristobal in Oregon hired Joe Moorhead as their offensive coordinator the same time that Georgia hired Todd Monken, and they essentially hired him for the exact same reason. Their offense had been lousy. Y'all, there's a chance that Justin Herbert is, I mean, some of y'all are heavy into this. How many quarterbacks in the NFL right now are better than Justin Herbert? Not very many, right? I mean, Justin Herbert's is a singular talent at the quarterback position, a truly elite young quarterback. Go back and look at his numbers at Oregon. They weren't good. Like, Oregon has not been good offensively for a while. So I know that for those of us who live 3,000 miles from Eugene, Oregon, it would be very easy to assume, oh, well, Dan Lanning's going to Oregon. He's trying to bring some toughness with him. The honest truth is like Oregon, a little bit of an outlier, kind of in that West Coast area. They actually are a little tougher than the average Big 12, Pac-12 team you sort of assume would be. But they have not been very good on offense. They, had Herbert for the most part, squandered him. So part of the issue for Lanning is how much he can kind of lean on Kenny Dillingham, their offensive coordinator, to get some points on the board. Because they've been very good all along the offensive line. They actually ran the ball decently well. They played defense really well under Mario Cristobal, but they just weren't doing it at a very high offensive clip. It's like, Cristobal has gone to Miami. It's a big hire for them, and he's kind of resurrecting that program. At least it seems like he's in the midst of doing that. But there are a lot of Oregon fans that, I guess, didn't love the fact that the Cristobal teams were thought to be a little bit of man ball. They were a little bit of what, Kirby Smart was once criticized at Georgia for being. So the transition to physical toughness for Oregon may actually not be as tough as you might think. And one of the things that you should probably expect Oregon to do a little bit against Georgia is, kind of want to, trade paint with you a little bit. They probably are kind of comfortable doing that because in the Cristobal era, they kind of were. They have not scored points very easily. Sandy Price also mentioning Ohio State, who we kind of talked about earlier in the show, just kind of being sort of like mindlessly overrated, remembering that they lost to Oregon to begin last season, which is true. Brandon Griffin says, I hope Kirby has gotten so tired of the not an offensive team criticism that he just unleashes hell on opposing defenses this year. Yeah, I'd love to see that there as well. And I it's hard to read between the lines sometimes because, you never quite know what's in somebody's head, statements about someone's state of mind not admissible in court. And it's the same thing here when it comes to Kirby Smart. But I sort of gather, maybe you agree with me on this, I sort of gather that Kirby's actually confused by all this. Like, as opposed to like angry that people are saying what they're saying, I sort of think that inside the football building over there, they're just kind of confused. Like, I think they honestly don't know if the people that say the things about Georgia actually have the internet and they can like look online and see where Georgia ranked in certain categories or just watch the dadgum games. So there may be some extra motivation to go out there and just sort of show people what's real. But I also think there's a little bit of I don't know if someone like Kirby can be flabbergasted, but a little bit of just confusion about, wait a second, did people not see what we did last year? That is the case. Gary Holt mentioning Lanning as a recruiter. Yeah, I mean, it seems like he's bringing that with him to Eugene for sure. Becky Rutledge says, I pull for anyone who plays Ohio State. Yeah, there is a lot of that that's out there. Like, there are a couple of teams. Notre Dame's kind of always been that team. I think Ohio State's been that team for a lot of people. I think that Texas has become that team. And who knows, maybe Georgia's on its way to being that team, where people just sort of always root against them as if they were a rival. Matt Rugavina says the media writ large wants us to be like LSU in 2019, a one-hit wonder. I definitely think there is a little bit of, I think party crashers make people a little nervous. And, maybe LSU in 2019 was a party crasher. I'd love to go back and see some of the chatter after Clemson won its first national championship, if they got treated that way. I think that Clemson, I don't know, I think that Clemson, when they won the title in 2016, they were kind of celebrated because people were sort of bored with Alabama. But if that be the case, then that doesn't make any sense because, Georgia also beat Alabama too, which now makes the SEC seemingly a little more competitive. So I don't know. Maybe there's no clear narrative here. But there definitely seems to be, and the honest truth is a lot of people who do this for a living and they're not putting a ton of thought into things they say. They just sort of grab for the easiest, possible take, which is, hey, Georgia, back to the kids' table for you. Congratulations on your one-hit wonder status. Back to the kids' table for you. That's just sort of an easy, low-hanging fruit type take, and maybe that's where that comes from. All right, we got to go. It's really, really late. All right, let's see here. Drew Miller on the subject of Ohio State and Michigan sort of playing, the sort of easier type schedules. I mean, and in the future, this kind of stuff's going to matter even more. Ohio State and the Big Ten have huge brands. Their alumni bases are very large. There's a reason why the Big Ten commands so much TV dollars. Is because there are a lot of Big Ten fans. Like the average Big Ten school is really big, much bigger than the average SEC school is. And so like the overall size from a business standpoint of the Big Ten is going to matter in the future. But the collection of great players that seems to exist in the SEC is going to be the other sharp contrast there. John Paul Williams says, see my comments above comparing the smoke around Ryan Day to the smoke that always surrounded Dan Mullen. I guess that was pretty much the post. Not the same coaches, but the perception about them are similar. That's really interesting. That's also really interesting. John, I go back to like Jim Harbaugh, who kind of took the jab at Day a year ago. Talking about how, there's some guys who are sort of born on third base and they think they hit a triple. Day sort of inherits this Ohio State program and he's sort of treated as a great coach because he's at Ohio State. But Ohio State's they've mostly always won. They're going to likely always win. And just because Day's the guy at the helm right now doesn't mean he's the architect of all that. He's just the guy who inherited it. And the comparison to Dan Mullen in terms of the sort of level of praise that he got that eventually he just couldn't live into, I think that's pretty interesting. Now, here's where I have to try to be honest. Like, Kirby Smart faced a bunch of criticism going into last year, too, until he didn't. There were a lot of people who would say of Kirby Smart, well, he's never going to win, he's never going to win, he's never going to win. If he doesn't do it now, when is he going to do it? And then he did it. And so he answered that criticism. We at least have to be honest and say, for a guy like Ryan Day, who right now just sort of seems like the scruffy beard guy, the same way that like a lot of these NFL coaches are, that maybe he shows himself to be a true honest-to-goodness coach this year. Maybe he does build a team that actually has a little bit of a pulse on both sides of the football. Like, he's going to have a chance this year to answer our criticism of him, or at least answer our questions about him, our doubts of him. He has a chance to do that. But if he doesn't, then eventually he kind of will become Dan Mullen. Like, Mullen was being praised by some people as a great coach almost right up until the point where he got fired. And it's just kind of funny how disconnected the narrative was from the reality. And just notice that if the same thing does happen with Ryan Day. It may not. Ryan Day's a young guy. He may evolve into a truly great football coach. But if it doesn't, let's just call it what it is. Good comment. It's a very good comment. Keith Fold says, how do you get to be a milestone follower? That's a great question. I don't know. Facebook has a lot of things like this that I don't know much about. Final comments over here on YouTube, and we'll get ready to go. And we'll take one more spin around the entire deal. Bruce Eklund says that Kirby won his national championship fast compared to other great coaches. It's 100% true. And, Smart has been compared to other coaches at very different points in their track record, their tenure as a head coach. In retrospect, it may have taken Georgia, the program, too long to win a national championship, but it certainly didn't take Kirby, the coach of Georgia, too long to win a national championship. If anything, it's actually somewhat miraculous that he did it as fast as he did. That's what's miraculous. That's what's kind of amazing here, that, Dabo Swinney wasn't too far behind, and then Kirby won one in year 6, Dabo won one in year 8. So it's not like it's unprecedented to have won one so soon into a coaching career. But, guys like Nick Saban were much more seasoned when they won their first national championship. Urban Meyer kind of the same way. Most coaches, they kind of were. And so, if anything, Kirby Smart actually made it look easy with how quickly he did it. That's probably true. Thomas Van Santa, good to see you checking in. Appreciate that. All right, we've got to go. It's very late, but I wanted to do a little longer comments today. Final over at DawgNation.com. I looked at the Oregon schedule earlier, and Hemingway says the only Oregon game I care about is on September 3rd. There you go. Certainly fair enough. Cam Hasey's got him going 9-3, though. That may be about close. I may go 10-2 on that because I do think they lose to Utah, but 9-3 is certainly a possibility. Final comments on Facebook. Sam Burke says that Clemson blew it when they didn't maintain the momentum after winning twice in 3 years. Yeah, I think this year's, honestly, obviously around here we're obsessed with Georgia football, but the team beyond Georgia I'm maybe the most interested in this year is Clemson. I am very fascinated. Is it just over? Are they no longer a playoff level team? In the absence of having a great quarterback, is that no longer true? They're still recruiting at a pretty high level, especially on the defensive side. Can they get that back this year? Do they feel like a Clemson team that is connected to those consecutive streaks of being in the playoff, or did not making it last year kind of break that chain? I think Clemson's a fascinating team. Philip Jordan Wells says 1980 is more profitable than 2021 in the media, but oh well. There's probably a sense to which that's true, that you have to speak in shorthand, and Georgia being the destined underachieve type team, it became confusing when that no longer was true, and folks don't like to be confused. I mean, actually, Clemson did deal with some of this. At a certain point, the whole notion of Clemsoning, hey, giving a game away that costs you your season, at a certain point in time, Clemson did kind of end all that, and that was confusing when that happened there too. Randy Hall says next high school game. So we got Porky Kell coming up in a couple of weeks. I'm doing a ton of games for that. I'm also doing a fun game on Saturday. Thank you for asking. I'll promote. On Peachtree TV, my buddy Rusty Manziel stopping by for that too. It's the Gwinnett Football League Sheriff's Bowl. These are some really talented, middle school level players. Just kind of a fun thing to do on TV to kind of kick off the season. Obviously, the Gwinnett talent level is extraordinary. This is going to be a Parkview feeder team and a Grayson feeder team playing each other. We'll do a lot of season preview stuff during the game. We'll also see, I guarantee there's a future 5-star somewhere on this field if it's Grayson's feeder team and Parkview's feeder teams. So we're going to do that Saturday afternoon on Peachtree TV in support of the Gwinnett County Sheriff's Department, and just kind of a cool event. So you'll actually see me on TV if you tune in Saturday afternoon on Peachtree TV. Good to see Miriam Corbin in the comments section today. I always appreciate her. Great stuff as per usual. Miriam, I think this is on Ryan Day, saying that he gets all the praise over Kirby after all Kirby's done. She says these experts are not experts. They prove it every time they open their mouths. Miriam, I'm right there with you on that. No problem with that whatsoever. So good stuff. Let's turn our attention to the AJC here. Online, Atlanta Journal-Constitution, AJC.com. And let's turn our attention to some cool stuff that you can see in the AJC here today. How about a huge reaction to Atlanta Braves Major League Baseball trade deadline. Braves very active right there before the deadline, bringing in a closer. Obviously, a couple moves before that. You can break all of that down, not only at AJC.com, but a Braves Report podcast, really fun there on that too. Good column from Michael Cunningham there on that also. And kind of a cool idea, the way in which ticket situation could be changed for the Falcons and United. They got kind of a clever idea about how they can honor some of their fans. That's kind of fun. And a neat look at the Savannah Bananas, minor league team down there in Savannah. That's fun stuff there too. So check all of that out online, Atlanta Journal-Constitution, AJC.com. Y'all have a great day. Big thanks to our friends at R.S. Andrews for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised. The price is promised. You can trust R.S. Andrews on that. Air conditioning unit, they can get it tuned back up to factory fresh specs where you can find them online, rsandrews.com. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. We'll look forward to talking to you then.